Texans sign Sheldon Rankins. What does that mean for the defensive line group? I think everybody's waiting to hear about that. And Ross Tucker of CBS Sports and the Ross Tucker podcast joins the show.
And to tie it all in, we want to develop a great team here that we can deliver wins to the city of Houston. We want to deliver a championship here to the city of Houston, and that's what it'll be about.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Thursday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. I'm John Hickman, and I'm joined by Texas Credential Media member and Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis here, of course, to discuss the Houston Texans on Wednesday. Day 3 of free agency for the Houston Texans. The Texans went out and signed Sheldon Rankins, and I think that he will be the signing that a lot of people love. He was one of the guys that I had on my list a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the defensive line group, along with David Onyemata, that conversation that we had a few weeks back. And listen, I love this move. This helps shore up the defensive line group. Malik Collins at defensive tackle. Now you add Sheldon Rankins with the interchangeable piece and player like Hassan Ridgeway. Last year, Sheldon Rankins had 3 sacks, 43 total tackles, 7 QB hits, 4 tackles for loss, and it was really good alongside Quentin Williams. And so adding a guy like this, listen, play for New York, play for New Orleans, 2 teams where he had good years. His best year in the NFL, 40 tackles, 8 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, where he really dominated. And the best part about Sheldon Rankins wasn't expensive. Got him on a good deal. And so Sheldon Rankins is now a Houston Texan.
You know, I love this. This might be my favorite offseason acquisition for the Houston Texans in free agency. Everybody knows I'm from New Orleans. Of course, the Saints are my number 1 team. And I know how good Sheldon can be to a defensive line unit. As a matter of fact, when you go back and take a look at the success the New Orleans Saints had during the back half of the 2010s, especially once Cam Jordan started to really find his groove, he basically had his groove throughout the whole entire decade. But when you take a look at the success that the New Orleans Saints had on the defensive side of the ball, especially up front, Sheldon played a very important role to the New Orleans Saints' defense. And I know Cam Jordan get a lot of the praise. I get it. I understand it. He is a future Hall of Famer, but you cannot deny the importance of Sheldon. And when you compare what the Saints defensive line unit was from 2016 to 2002, 2021, whenever he departed and went to the Jets, when you go back and take a look at where it was last year, it kind of dipped, and that was a big part due to Sheldon's departure. Now, when you take a look at what he can do, how important he could be to a defensive line unit, and you translate that into what the Houston Texans are trying to do here, John, I'm not surprised by this signing. However, I love the fact that this basically sums up what you talked about on yesterday's show. It seems like the Houston Texans are trying to go after a fit, guys who actually fit their defensive or offensive scheme. And when you take a look at what DeMeco Ryans had to say, when you had to take a look at what Matt Burke had to say, they say their defensive scheme starts up front. And you just finished talking about it. This defensive line unit needed a boost, and they got that boost in Sheldon. The best thing about Sheldon, this is a guy who finished last season with a run defensive grade of 67.5, which would have made him the best run stopper over the last 3 seasons for the Houston Texans. And everybody know this number because I say it here almost every single week. The Houston Texans did give up 170 yards on the ground on that defensive side of the ball. We talked about it a lot It seems like since the departure of DJ Reader, the Houston Texans have struggled at stopping the run, and this is a step in the right direction. The only thing I don't like about this signing is the fact that it came with a 1-year deal.
1 year. I was about to get to
At 28 years
28.
old,
You want to lock him in for about 3
man.
years.
And not only that,
but Sheldon Rankins is a guy that, he's coming over from Robert Saleh.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans have a similar defense.
I didn't even make that connection yet.
Right, they have a similar defense that we are expected to see ran kind of mirroring each other. Play well last year. He'll be next to some good guys. I think this was a signing that a 3-year deal would have been perfect.
And not only that, he's also a good locker room guy as well. That's what I've been told. So the scheme, locker room guy, talent, it just made too much sense as to why Nick Caserio did not lock this young man down for more than 1 year. I would have been fine with 2 years, but maybe Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryans want to see how things play out. But John, this signing might be, unless they get somebody better, this signing might be their best signing in free agency. I love it. I cannot wait to see the improvements that this young man is going to make on that defensive front.
I want to give you guys some numbers before we move on. And of course, look at one more thing. When he was on the field for the Jets only allowed 3.82 yards per rush. That is something that, when you look at the big picture for Houston, absolutely needed. Now, really quick, before we move on to discuss football with Ross Tucker, what does this mean for the players already on the roster? Roy Lopez, right? The Thomas Booker, those guys, the defensive tackle group. Now, this does make Roy Lopez, I think, much more expendable as a player. Malik Collins, Hassan Rizwe, now adding Sheldon Rankins. I think that because of Thomas Booker's upside, you throw him in the mix. Kurt Hennish is a guy that, you don't know what Houston wants to do with him. Between Kurt Hennish and Roy Lopez, I think camp for those two players are going to be very important, because I also expect for Houston to maybe add a rookie defensive tackle through the draft at some point as well. And so now you look at the guys on the outside wondering, and I would even throw Thomas Booker in as well. As much as I would expect for him to have a jump in his game, we don't know how this team now views him. The franchise, the coaching staff, I know the front office drafted him last year, but we don't know how the team views him, the coaching staff. I'll throw him in the mix as well. But now I'm looking at camp, or I'm looking at this signing, and I'm asking myself, okay, at camp, it's going to be super important for both of you guys to stand out, because if you want to stay with the Houston Texans, what are you going to do to get better and play better to add your worth? And again, guys, only a 1-year deal, $10.5 million. Good signing, not long enough, in my opinion. And I just gave you the numbers for what Sheldon Rankins can do for a team defensively and stopping the run. I think this is the first year we will see Houston bring that number down, where they won't be top 5, top number 1 allowed, top 3 in rushing yards allowed. I don't think that'll be the case, and I'm looking forward to seeing Sheldon Rankins play football for the Texans. The end point of the NBA season is here, but it's still the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download FanDuel right now. It's safe, it's secure, and it's super easy to use. Also, FanDuel allows you to combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlays. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Welcome back in, Locked On Texan listeners and viewers. Right now, I definitely want to welcome to the show Ross Tucker of CBS Sports and the Ross Tucker Podcast, here to discuss the Houston Texans and the NFL offseason. Let's give a Locked On round of applause to Ross Tucker. Now, thanks for stopping by. Super excited to get your insight specifically on the Houston Texans. And since the hiring of DeMeco Ryans, you being a former NFL player, bringing over DeMeco Ryans, how has, in your opinion, the Texans' reputation changed since his hiring?
Well, first of all, my pleasure, John. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I talk about Houston a lot with my boys Payne and Prendergast weekly during the season, so it's nice to chat with you as well. Well, listen, I mean, I think everybody thought DeMeco Ryans was a home run. I think that there were other organizations like the Denver Broncos that wanted to hire DeMeco Ryans. I know even from his time in Philadelphia, he's one of the most revered and respected players they've ever had in the Eagles organization. I mean, he makes a very, very positive impression with every NFL organization he's come into contact with. The Niners didn't want to lose him. The Broncos wanted him. I think it's very telling and pretty impressive, quite frankly, that he chose the Texans. He wanted to be in Houston with you guys.
So to continue with that, do you feel as though is it still difficult for the Texans to sign some of the top free agents, as we've seen, not the top of the crop, cream of the crop of the free agency so far, or is the presumption right now to build through the NFL draft?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I actually kind of like the way the Texans have gone about it. I've always thought that this would sort of be my strategy if I were an NFL GM, which is they've been pretty aggressive getting, I don't know, what I would call tier 2 and tier 3 free agents right at the start. Because as a free agent, as a former player, you know, you're anxious. Who wants me and what are they offering? And a lot of teams, it's like they have these star players or the tier 1 guys as their priorities. So they focus on that. And it's kind of like, we'll worry about the other positions or the tier 2 or tier 3 guys later. But there's something to be said for going after, you know, the guys that you want that maybe other teams aren't as aggressive with in the first couple of days of free agency and getting them. You know, they'll think, you know what, bird in hand's worth two in the bush. And I like the fact that this team actually reached out to me right when it started. They wanted me. And so they've been doing that, you know, whether it's Jimmy Ward or Andrew Beck or any of the guys that they brought in, Winovich. I mean, they've been pretty targeted, Ridgeway, of guys they wanted on this roster that they felt like would improve the roster, were good players that they could get for a lot less money than what's going on with some of the other guys so far.
I'm glad you mentioned Andrew Beck. You know, he's missed a good chunk of time in the NFL, played 2 seasons in the past 4 to 5 years. When you look at what he can possibly be for this team, who, by the way, you look at Bobby Slowick, DeMeco Ryans, they're coming over from San Fran, an offense that Kyle Shanahan really liked to use. Kyle, that fullback utility type of player. Can he step into that role for the Houston Texans? Is that what the thought process is right now?
Well, that's clearly who they targeted, right? And yes, I think Slowick and DeMeco, but especially Slowick, they recognize the value of having a movable chess piece fullback in today's NFL. There's a bunch of different reasons for that, but one is, you know, you kind of force the defense to line up in regular personnel if you have a fullback and a tight end. Otherwise, they feel like they're a man short in the run game, and then you can split that guy out and get some favorable matchups. The other thing is it's changing a little bit because there's so many teams that have Shanahan, you know, disciples, so to speak. But there's still a lot of defenses, safeties, corners, outside backers. They don't really know how to take on the blocks of a fullback. They don't know how to fit some of those runs, right? If you have a fullback leaning on the edge, that's typically where a corner or a safety would come up and make a tackle. Now they got to figure out how to take on a fullback, which shoulder, what gap they're responsible. They're just not that used to doing it. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Niners have had so much success. Obviously, they feel like Juszczyk is invaluable, and they've gone out of their way to keep him in San Francisco. And I think these other organizations that have guys that have come from the Shanahan tree are realizing, hey, we want one of those guys too.
Ross Tucker of the CBS Sports and the Ross Tucker podcast. How deeply have you covered this year's NFL draft? Because I have a branch off question that I want to ask you. How deep have you paid attention to this draft?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm aware of the draft in general. I have not gone through and personally watched the tape of all of these guys, but I've been talking about the draft quite a bit. I have a draft podcast.
Right.
It's called the College Draft Podcast with Emery Hunt. So we talk about it once a week. I talk about the draft every week on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast with Greg Cosell from NFL Films. So I would not say I'm an expert. I've got 6 weeks or so to get there, but in general, I have a decent feel for the draft.
Which interior offensive lineman do you have your eyes on? Like, is there a center out there specifically at that center position with Houston trading for Shaq Mason? I think a lot of people here in the city of Houston, including myself, look at that trade as an immediate upgrade over AJ Cann. And I think Houston is going to go cheaper and younger by drafting a center to eventually take over. Is there a center in this year's draft that people in Houston should be looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the guy that jumps out to me is John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota. They have a good history of centers coming out of there, including Ben Hamilton. They've had some success with guys at that position, and he's just really impressive. He was a dominant player at the Senior Bowl. And so to be able to get him, that does seem like a Texans type of pick to get someone like him. Although there's other guys later on in the draft. I mean, I watched I live in Pennsylvania, so I watch a lot of Penn State football, and Juice Scruggs, who's a guy you get in the middle round, I think is a really impressive player as well. I've actually called Juice's game since he was in high school. And so, there are different guys they can get. Remember, when Nick Caserio was in New England, they had a lot of success drafting Dan Copen in a later round, and he was able to start games as a rookie 5th-round pick, which is impressive.
CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, those are, in my opinion, the top 2 quarterbacks in this year's draft. Houston sits at number 2. I don't anticipate them moving up. However, the prospect that's been blowing everybody's mind right now is Anthony Richardson. Athletically gifted, I think a physical freak. He checks off a lot of those things, and athlete, freak, all of that in terms of what he can do. Off script plays with his legs. But for Houston, who has to wait after Deshaun Watson is gone, and they've sat through the Davis Mills, the Tyrod Taylor, and even Kyle Allen for last year played some games. Should Houston even consider Anthony Richardson, or should they go best quarterback available?
Well, I think they should consider him. I mean, I do. I think any team should consider a guy with that unique physical ability, because it's virtually unprecedented. And we have seen in recent years the value of having a guy that has that kind of crazy ability. That said, I'm still going Bryce Young. I'm team Bryce Young. I don't think the Panthers will take him at 1. Sounds like they like Stroud. Maybe there's an off chance they take Anthony Richardson. And I think the Texans end up getting the guy that they probably wanted all along, even though they blew the opportunity to have the number 1 overall pick, which obviously would have been nice. They're still going to get their quarterback, I think. I think it's going to be Bryce Young, number 2. DeMeco Ryans just came from San Francisco, saw the success that Brock Purdy had as a rookie. Brock Purdy's not 6'4", doesn't run a 4.5 40. He's not some athletic phenom, which is why he was Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft. I mean, look, we've all watched, John, a ton of Alabama football the last couple of years.
Absolutely.
Can you remember him having a bad game? I mean, I don't remember him having a bad game. It seems like he doesn't have the physical ability of an Allen or even Mahomes, but he does have this innate ability to make the right play. I mean, he seemingly makes the right play at the right time. He's smart, he's accurate, and he's got tremendous pocket mobility. He's not going to run for 50 yards like Anthony Richardson, but honestly, how many times does an NFL quarterback actually do that? Right. Okay, great. He ran for 80 yards against LSU. Sweet. How many times is he going to do that in the NFL? Not many, if any. So I'd rather have the guy that makes the layups, makes the easy plays, and then even make some of the harder plays look easy. Bryce Young is my number 1 quarterback. I think the Texans are going to take him number 2 overall.
The one game where I saw Bryce Young struggle was against UT this past year. Through 3.5 quarters, that defense for UT was making it difficult for Bryce Young to survive out there on the field. And then there were moments in that fourth quarter where he just turned it on. And that was the moment where if I sit back and I go through any of his games, I say to myself, that's the game people should look at because that's the player that you're going to get. Everything doesn't have to be perfect for him to go out there and win and succeed. And I don't necessarily think that Bryce Young needs a system to be built around him for him to succeed. I think Bryce Young is one of those quarterbacks, and CJ Stroud to a certain extent as well, that can just step in and make that offense go.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously already been operating a pro-style offense with Bill O'Brien, and I think he's got the mobility to be able to function at a high level in Slowick's offense. You know, he can get out there on the edge on the boots like Purdy did, gives you enough running, enough threat on the boots and the play action. I just think he's a really good player. And think about the other quarterbacks that Shanahan had success with. You know, Nick Mullen, CJ Beathard, these aren't big guys. You know, so much of the passes in that offense are boots, rollouts, play action, where it's not like it's just a straight drop back pass in the pocket all the time.
Last question before you get out of here for today. I know you got some things to do. I saw you started the hashtag Show Me Your Beer. Now, I can't wait for Houston fans to get involved with this in the comments section of YouTube. But in your opinion, it's game day, Super Bowl, college game day, whatever, tailgating. We're watching football at a football party. What are your top 3 go-to beers?
I love it, John. So 2 things, right? So number 1, I'm an IPA guy. Number
people
2,
down here would love that.
What's that?
People in Texas would love that.
Really? I thought Texas people were more drinking like Lone Star or like light beers.
Deep down in Texas roots, in some of these country rural areas in Texas, they love a good IPA. They love a good IPA.
I like it. Well, so I got 3 for you. Number 1, if I'm not having an IPA, I'm having a Labatt Blue Light, which, by the way, they are the sponsor for the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. So you bet your butt I'm having a Labatt Blue Light.
I love it.
That's number 1. Number 2, the other 2 IPAs I love, both happen to be from Massachusetts. I don't know if it's the water up there or whatever, but Treehouse, the Julius from Treehouse is just so good. It's so good. It's amazing. I think there's a reason why it's ranked number 1 in the world. And then I'm a big fan of the beers from Vitamin C Brewing, Vitamin SEA Brewing. My boy Dino hooks me up with some of their delicious New England hazy IPAs I could drink all day, except there are a lot of calories, bro. John, I diet, I eat healthy, but these 250 calorie beers are keeping me over 250 pounds.
Are you still close to your playing weight?
Oh, no. When I used to go to training camp, I'd be between 320 and 325. And right now I'm like 255, maybe something like that.
Okay. Listen, Ross Tucker of Ross Tucker's podcast and CBS Sports, thank you for stopping by. Before you get out of here, you told us about your favorite beers. Now tell us where all the listeners can find you on Twitter and, of course, your podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it, John. So I'm on social media at Ross Tucker NFL, pretty much any platform you're on, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even TikTok. So whatever you're on, I'm there at Ross Tucker NFL. And yeah, in addition to my NFL content, football content, I do post my favorite beers, which people love to engage in. And I post if I'm eating something delicious and or just something that the press box food. By the way, the Texans, I did their game against the Eagles, a Thursday night game. Texans, very good press box food. I was very happy that Thursday night. So if you want to see what NFL teams and college teams have in the press box, that's hashtag Tuck Spreads on Twitter and Instagram. Okay. And obviously the Show Me Your Beer. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for you guys, John. I really am. I think the Texans take a big step forward here this year with D'Amico and Bryce Young.
I love how you put the stamp on Bryce Young. Is that what we are hearing? Is Bryce Young to Houston a real thing, Ross?
I'm not hearing anything. I'm just
Uh-oh.
telling you what I do, what I think they're gonna do.
Thank you for stopping by, Ross. Until next time, enjoy your day.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for making the Locked On Texans your first listen every day. For your second listen, make sure you check out Locked On NFL Scouting with the draft dudes from the free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find NFL Scouting, with the draft dudes wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Listen, towards the end of that conversation with Ross Tucker, and be sure to follow him on Twitter. Also, check his own Ross Tucker podcast out as well on all of the major podcasting platforms. Listen, he likes Bryce Young a lot. He made a lot of interesting points about Anthony Richardson, which I really do agree with. However, I don't know if he's tipping his hat or anything, but Bryce Young to Houston, Cody, let's talk about the possibility of Bryce Young to Houston, because a couple shows back, we had Big Sarge on, and he asked me, how do I feel about CJ and Bryce Young coming to Houston with this type of offensive line? My concern was I am scared of the possibility of him playing because of the interior line. Now you bring over Shaq Mason, who is known to be an excellent pass blocker and pass protection. That does ease up my mind a little bit with Bryce Young to Houston, who, by the way, my only knock against him is his body frame. It has nothing to do with him playing the quarterback position. I think he's intellectually gifted, one of the most intellectual quarterbacks we've seen in the past 10 years. Bryce Young comes, Cody. What is your emotion behind Bryce Young with the number 2 overall pick?
I like it. And with the Carolina Panthers trading up for number 1, and they're targeting a quarterback, unless they do something stupid and go out and get Will Levis or something. I'm expecting them to take CJ, and we know how Carolina feels about bigger quarterbacks. I mean, it's understandable. They had top 5 at one point, the best quarterback in the league, and Cam Newton, and he was a gifted bigger quarterback. However, on the opposite side of the NFC South, there was a guy by the name of Drew Brees who wasn't that much bigger than a Bryce Young, that I actually grew up and still love watching to this day. I'm not too concerned about Bryce's size that much, only because I know when you get him with the right nutritionist here with the Houston Texans, they're going to beef him up some. And it's going to be enough to where
some good down south eating too.
Well, I hope it's not that good, because then you're looking at a possibility of his stature moving in the wrong direction. Then we're going to have a totally different problem than the one we have here today. But I do believe once he gets here and he gets an opportunity to get with the Texans nutritionist, and he's going to be able to build his body up to the point where at least he's going to be able to take those unfortunate hits. However, John, Bryce Young to Houston is just starting to make too much sense, especially considering the fact that when we played around with the idea of the Texans being one of the few teams who drafted a potential franchise quarterback, and you surrounded him with guys that he excelled in college on both sides of the ball. You see it's going on in Jacksonville, it's going on in Cincinnati, and the Houston Texans, if I'm not mistaken, they could be the third team to do so, given the fact that you got John Mechie coming out, given the fact that Christian Harris has talked so highly to me about Bryce Young, to Big Sarge about Bryce Young. Like, it's just starting to make too much sense. But you know me, John, as long as they end off their second pick by saying either CJ or Bryce, I am happy. Look, as I said a couple of days ago, you have the number 2 pick. not 3, not 4, not 5, 6, 7, none of that. You have the number 2 pick, and there are 2 quarterbacks who probably starting week 1 of the 2023 campaign. Now, I understand it's going to take time for them to develop and really get accustomed to everything, but you have 2 quarterbacks who, at the end of next season, we're going to be sitting here looking at both of those guys and saying they are the next franchise quarterback for the Carolina Panthers and for the Houston Texans. And you have an opportunity to pick between one of the two. God bless you. You have an opportunity to pick either one of the two. Just keep it simple. Just keep it simple. But overall, I love the idea. I see nothing wrong with it.
This is kind of like the 2012 draft where, Indy went Andrew Luck first and Robert Griffin III, who, by the way, if they go quarterback, which they should, RG3 was a phenomenal quarterback, but hopefully that the management of this team will be much more better than the Washington Redskins, now Washington Commanders. But in that draft, you couldn't go wrong. I don't think so. So you got to
looking back on it, looking back on that draft, did any one of those teams come out winners? Because I understand Andrew Luck had, he was rising, but he retired before he even reached the pinnacle of his career. And in terms of RG3, it's unfortunate, but injuries really derailed his career.
Yeah, I would say no. Honestly, I would say that they had moments. RG3's moments was cut a whole lot shorter than Andrew Luck's, of course, but no, they didn't. And that was also, Andrew Luck, that was also due to management not protecting their quarterback as early as they should have. I mean, they built a great offensive line.
And he said,
by the time it was already, he was like, I can't do it no more. And then we saw what happened with RG3.
You know that meme of that guy that chuck up the deuces and he just fades away.
Disappears. And that's what we're about to do right now. Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans and subscribe to the YouTube page as well.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.